In the dark alleyways of Neo-Santoria, a sanitation worker stumbled upon the silhouette of a pitiful woman, clothes in tatters, her eyes like beams of light amid the waste. He never imagined that his decision to offer her help would lead to a revolution that would change both their fates and reveal a most surprising true identity. In the towering metropolis of Neo-Santoria, where the year 2187 cast its neon shadows across stacked urban layers, the separation between wealth and poverty couldn't have been more stark. The upper echelons gleamed with polished chrome and holographic advertisements, while the lower levels festered with technological waste and homeless souls forgotten by society. It was a city where flying vehicles zipped between skyscrapers and service robots catered to the elite. Yet the alleyways remained clogged with discarded tech and those with nowhere else to go. Arlo Nguyen, 30 years old and perpetually tired around the eyes, adjusted his sanitation uniform as he guided his waste collection vehicle down another narrow passage. The municipal-issued jumpsuit had seen better days, patched in places where the fabric had worn thin from years of use. A public sanitation worker wasn't a glamorous profession in Neo-Santoria, but it paid enough to keep a roof over his head. Barely. Sector B12 almost complete, he muttered to himself, checking the digital tracker embedded in his collection cart. The weekend night shift was usually quiet. Most high-tier residents had retreated to their elevated apartments, and even the slums seemed more deserted than usual. Only the occasional stray cat or rat scurried away from his approaching headlamp. Arlo had always been contemplative during his shifts, often wondering about the lives connected to the trash he collected. Each discarded item told a story: broken smart devices that once brought joy, tattered clothing that once made someone feel confident, expired medication that once kept someone alive. Tonight was no different as he methodically emptied overflowing bins into his cart. 2 more blocks and I can call it a night, he said, his voice disappearing into the ambient hum of distant machinery and dripping pipes. The smell of decaying organic matter, mixed with a sharp tang of battery acid, had long ceased to bother him. After 7 years on the job, Arlo's nose had adapted to the potpourri of urban decay. As he turned the corner into a particularly neglected alley, his headlamp caught something unusual among the piles of broken electronics and food containers. At first, he thought it might be another holographic advertisement glitching out. They sometimes ended up in the trash when businesses couldn't afford to maintain them. But as he approached, the shape resolved into something far more concerning. Curled between a discarded refrigerator unit and several bags of restaurant waste lay a human form. This wasn't entirely uncommon in Neo-Santoria's lower levels, but something about this particular scene made Arlo stop his cart immediately. "Hello?" he called out, approaching cautiously. "Are you all right?" No response came from the huddled figure. Drawing closer, his light revealed a woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, wearing what appeared to be the remnants of once fine clothing. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair matted against her head. What struck Arlo most, however, were her eyes when they finally fluttered open, piercing and alert despite her apparent condition, reflecting his headlamp with an intensity that seemed out of place among the garbage. "Can you hear me?" Arlo knelt beside her, noticing how she curled tighter into herself, eyes darting around in confusion. "I'm not going to hurt you. Do you need medical attention?" The woman opened her mouth as if to speak, but only a hoarse sound emerged. She looked at her own hands as though they belonged to someone else, turning them over slowly before raising confused eyes to Arlo. Protocol dictated that Arlo should call district security when encountering homeless individuals who needed assistance. But something about the woman's disoriented state and the unusual quality of her tattered clothes, he could swear he saw the remnants of intricate embroidery along one sleeve, made him hesitate. "I don't think you belong here," he said softly, more to himself than to her. The woman attempted to stand, but stumbled immediately. Arlo caught her before she hit the ground, noticing how light she felt in his arms, how her bones pressed against his fingers through the thin fabric of her clothes. He made a decision then that would alter the course of his unremarkable life. "I'm going to help you," he told her, supporting her weight. "My apartment isn't much, but it's better than this alley." The woman didn't resist as he helped her to the passenger seat of his collection vehicle. Municipal regulations expressly forbade using sanitation equipment to transport civilians. But Arlo rationalized that this was an emergency. As he secured her in the seat, something metallic fell from the pocket of her tattered dress. He picked it up, a small, tarnished object that might once have been a circlet or crown, made of a strange alloy he couldn't identify. "Is this yours?" he asked, holding it up. Her eyes widened in recognition, and her hand shot out to grasp it with surprising strength. She clutched the metal object to her chest and nodded once, the first clear communication she had offered. Arlo placed the collection vehicle in motion, navigating away from his assigned route toward the residential block, where he rented a small unit in the common tier of an aging apartment complex. As they hummed through the dark streets, passing under the shadows of towering structures above, he wondered what circumstances had brought this mysterious woman to such a desperate state. He also wondered, with growing unease, what exactly he had gotten himself into. Arlo's apartment occupied a small corner on the 42nd floor of Residency Block D7, a dilapidated structure that had once been considered modern housing. Now it sagged under the weight of neglect and overcrowding. Wedged between similar buildings in the city's common tier, the level where those who weren't destitute but would never be wealthy made their homes. Getting the woman inside without attracting attention had been challenging. The overnight security drone had been easy enough to avoid. Its programming hadn't been updated in years, and it followed the same predictable patrol pattern. The few neighbors still awake at this hour were thankfully too absorbed in their own concerns to notice Arlo supporting a disheveled stranger through the corridor. His apartment door slid open with a reluctant hiss, revealing the compact space he called home. A single room with a kitchenette in one corner, a fold-down bed along the wall, and a tiny bathroom pod. The only luxury was a small window that offered a sliver of a view, mostly of the adjacent building's concrete facade, but with a thin strip of night sky visible above. "It's not much," Arlo said apologetically, as he helped the woman to his only chair, a worn synthetic leather piece salvaged from a corporate office clearance. "But it's clean and safe." The woman looked around with those alert, puzzling eyes, taking in every detail of the modest space. She still clutched the metal object, what Arlo now thought might be some kind of crown or tiara, tightly in her hands. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, filling a glass with water from the tap and offering it to her. She accepted the water and drank thirstily. But when she tried to speak, only disjointed sounds emerged. Frustration crossed her face, and she touched her throat with trembling fingers. "That's okay," Arlo said quickly. "You don't have to talk right now. You're probably exhausted." He hesitated, then added, "I should probably give you something to call you until we figure things out. How about Juno?" The name had come to him suddenly. From an old myth his grandmother had told him about a queen of the heavens. Something about this woman, despite her current state, carried a dignity that the name seemed to fit. She tilted her head slightly, considering the name, then gave a small nod. "Juno it is, then," Arlo said with relief. "I'm Arlo Nguyen." While Juno sipped her water, Arlo gathered his spare set of clothes, a simple shirt and drawstring pants, and placed them on the bed. "You can change into these if you want. The bathroom's there," he said, pointing to the narrow door of the cleansing pod. "I'll wait outside in the hall to give you some privacy." Before leaving, he hesitated, then added, "I should probably let you know that I'm breaking about a dozen municipal regulations by bringing you here instead of reporting you to district services. But something tells me that's not what you need right now." Juno's eyes held his for a long moment, and Arlo had the unsettling sensation that she understood far more than she could express. In the corridor, Arlo leaned against the wall, questioning his own judgment. What did he really know about this woman? She could be dangerous, mentally unstable, or involved in something illegal. Yet, something about her seemed so lost, so out of place, like an exotic bird that had fallen from the sky into a world where it didn't belong. When he returned to the apartment, after what he judged to be sufficient time, Juno had changed into his spare clothes. They hung loosely on her slight frame, but she looked markedly better without the filthy rags. She had managed to clean her face and hands, revealing skin that was pale but unmarked by the weathered appearance common to Neo Santoria's homeless population. She sat perched on the edge of his bed, the metallic crown-like object resting on her lap. She had attempted to smooth her tangled hair, which Arlo now saw was an unusual shade. Not quite blonde, not quite silver, but something in between that caught the apartment's dim lighting in strange ways. "You look better," he said, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her. "Are you hungry?" At her nod, he quickly prepared a simple meal from his limited supplies: synthetic protein cubes reconstituted with flavor enhancers, and some real vegetable paste that cost him nearly a day's wages each week. It wasn't much, but it was nutritious. Juno ate carefully at first. Then, with increasing urgency, as if suddenly realizing how hungry she was. Arlo watched her, noting the precise way she held the utensils, despite her apparent disorientation. Not the habits of someone who had been on the streets for long. "That crown thing," he said when she had finished eating. "Is it important to you?" Juno looked down at the object, running her fingers over its tarnished surface. She nodded emphatically, then held it out to Arlo as if wanting him to examine it. He took it carefully, turning it over in his hands. It was lighter than it looked, made of some alloy he couldn't identify. The design was intricate, with what might have been gemstones once set into the metal, though most were now missing. What caught his attention were the fine circuitry lines etched into the interior surface. This wasn't merely decorative, it was technological in nature. "This is no ordinary piece of jewelry," he murmured. "It's some kind of tech, isn't it?" Juno made a sound that might have been affirmation, her eyes fixed on the crown, with an intensity that spoke volumes about its importance to her. Arlo returned it carefully. "We'll figure this out," he promised, though he had no idea how. "For now, you should rest. You can take the bed. I'll use the floor cushion." As he set up his makeshift sleeping arrangement, Arlo's mind raced with questions. Who was this woman? How had she ended up in that alley? What was the story behind the technological crown? And most pressingly, what was he going to do about his unexpected guest when morning came? He had to report for his next shift in less than 6 hours, and he couldn't simply leave her alone in his apartment. Bringing a stranger, especially one who couldn't or wouldn't speak, into his home had been impulsive, perhaps even foolish. Yet, as he glanced at Juno, now curled on his bed with the crown clutched protectively against her chest, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. Whatever mystery surrounded this woman, Arlo was now inexorably part of it. The following days established a precarious routine. Arlo arranged his shifts to minimize the time Juno spent alone in the apartment, using some of his precious saved credits to purchase basic necessities for her. Communication remained challenging. Juno seemed physically capable of speech, but unable to form coherent words or sentences, as if the connection between her thoughts and voice had been severed. Instead, they developed a system of gestures and expressions. Arlo was surprised by how quickly Juno adapted, her intelligence evident despite her inability to speak. She would point to objects, mime actions, or draw simple pictures with the stylus and tablet Arlo had provided. One evening, about a week after finding her, Arlo returned home to find Juno intensely focused on his tablet. She had been attempting to repair the crown-like object using tools she'd found in his maintenance kit. When she noticed him, she excitedly gestured for him to come closer, pointing at the screen where she had sketched a crude map of what appeared to be Neo Santoria's central district. "You remember the city layout?" Arlo asked, surprised. Juno nodded, then pointed to a specific location on the map, the exclusive upper-tier area known as Solara Heights, where the wealthiest citizens and dignitaries resided. She then pointed to herself, her eyes conveying a message Arlo couldn't quite decipher. "You lived there," he guessed. She shook her head, frustrated, then pointed to the crown and back to the location with greater urgency. "The crown belongs there? Or there's something there connected to the crown?" This elicited an enthusiastic nod. Juno then sketched what looked like a building, tall, ornate, unlike the utilitarian structures of lower Neo Santoria. "That looks like the Interplanetary Embassy complex," Arlo said slowly, recognition dawning. "Are you saying you're connected to one of the embassies?" Juno's expression brightened, but then clouded with what looked like fear. She quickly erased the drawing with a swipe of her hand. Before Arlo could question further, a harsh pounding at his door made them both jump. Juno immediately retreated to the corner of the room, crown clutched protectively. Arlo approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" "District security, open up, citizen!" With a sinking feeling, Arlo slid the door open to reveal two uniformed officers, their expressions stern beneath their regulation caps. "Arlo Nguyen?" the taller officer asked, consulting his wrist display. "Yes, that's me." "We've received reports of an unauthorized occupant in this unit. All residents must be registered with district housing authorities." The officer's gaze moved past Arlo to where Juno stood frozen in the corner. "Is this individual registered to your residence?" Arlo's mind raced. "She's my cousin, visiting from the agricultural district. I was going to register her tomorrow." The second officer stepped forward. "Visitors requiring overnight accommodation must be registered within 12 hours of arrival. It's been reported that this individual has been present for several days." "Reported by whom?" Arlo asked. Though he could guess, the walls in these buildings were thin, and his next-door neighbor, Tanner, had always been unnecessarily concerned with regulations. "That's irrelevant," the first officer said. "What is relevant is that you're in violation of Housing Code 5.7b. We'll need to see identification for both residents." Arlo felt panic rising. Juno had no identification that he knew of, and his story was already falling apart. "I have my ID," he said, reaching for his citizen card. "My cousin's documentation is still being processed after her transfer from Ag District. You know how slow bureaucracy can be." The officers exchanged skeptical glances. "Without proper documentation, the individual must be taken to district processing for identification and registration." "That won't be necessary," came a new voice from down the corridor. A slender woman with cropped hair and technician coveralls approached confidently. "I've got the transfer approval right here." Arlo recognized Mara Solis, his neighbor from 3 doors down. They weren't close friends, but they had helped each other with minor repairs over the years. Mara held up her tech pad, displaying what appeared to be official documentation. "Just came through the system. I was on my way to deliver it." She nodded to Arlo. "Your cousin's approval. All set for a 30-day stay." The officers scrutinized the display, and Arlo held his breath. He knew Mara worked in electronic systems maintenance and had a reputation for being able to fix more than just broken circuits. But he never thought he'd be the beneficiary of her particular skills. After what seemed like an eternity, the first officer handed the pad back to Mara. "This appears to be in order. However," he turned to Arlo, "you're still required to complete the physical registration at the district office within 48 hours. "Absolutely," Arlo agreed quickly. "First thing tomorrow." After a few more stern warnings about housing regulations, the officers departed. As soon as they were out of earshot, Arlo turned to Mara with relief.
I don't know how to thank you.
Mara's smile was knowing. Start by telling me who your cousin really is and why you're hiding her. Arlo hesitated, glancing at Juno, who was watching them both with wary eyes.
It's complicated, he began. I found her during my shift, in bad shape. She can't speak or won't, and I think she might be in some kind of trouble.
Mara raised an eyebrow.
The kind of trouble that involves security officers.
I don't know, Arlo admitted. But I couldn't just leave her in that alley. Mara studied Juno for a long moment, noting the unusual quality of her bearing, despite the borrowed clothes and evident confusion. She doesn't look like any street dweller I've seen. Her gaze shifted to the metallic object in Juno's hands. And what's that she's holding onto like it's a lifeline? Some kind of crown or tiara. It has tech embedded in it that I can't identify. This caught Mara's professional interest. As an electronics technician, she had access to tools and knowledge beyond Arlo's basic maintenance training.
Interesting, she murmured. Listen, those security guys will be back, and my little document trick won't hold up to serious scrutiny. You need a better plan than hiding her in your apartment.
Arlo ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I know. But what am I supposed to do? She can't tell me who she is or where she came from. Mara considered this, then nodded decisively. Bring her and that crown thing to my place tomorrow evening. I've got some equipment that might help us figure out what we're dealing with. She started to leave, then turned back. And Arlo, be careful. Nothing good ever comes from finding mysterious women in alleyways. After she left, Juno approached Arlo hesitantly, her expression questioning. That was Mara, he explained. She's going to help us understand what that crown is. Maybe it will give us some clues about you. Juno nodded, her fingers tracing the contours of the metallic object. For a moment, her eyes seemed to unfocus, as if she were seeing something far away. Then she shuddered, and the moment passed. That night, as Arlo tried to sleep on his floor cushion, he found himself wondering what exactly he had stumbled into. The crown, the embassy connection, Juno's evident fear, all pointed to something far more complex than a simple case of amnesia or homelessness. Whatever it was, he was now committed to seeing it through, for better or worse. The next day brought new complications. Arlo returned from his shift to find his apartment door ajar and the sound of angry voices inside. His heart racing. He rushed in to find his neighbor Tanner, the likely source of the security report, looming over Juno, who was backed against the wall, the crown clutched protectively to her chest. I know what you are, Tanner was saying, his voice slurred with synthetic alcohol. Thinking you're too good for the likes of us? I've seen your type before, slumming it when things go wrong up top. Hey, Arlo shouted, dropping his bag. Get away from her! Tanner turned, his bloated face flushed with anger. Well, if it isn't the knight in shining garbage collector's uniform, your little cousin's story didn't fool anyone. Nguyen. Get out of my apartment! Tanner! Arlo said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. Or what? Tanner sneered. You'll report me to security? That would be ironic, considering you're a legal house guest. He jabbed a finger toward Juno. Look at her, putting on airs with that piece of junk crown. Thinks she's royalty or something. Juno's eyes flashed at these words, a spark of something, recognition, anger, lighting them momentarily. I said get out, Arlo repeated, stepping closer. He wasn't a large man, but years of hauling waste had given him a solid strength. Tanner assessed the situation, apparently deciding that pursuing his harassment wasn't worth a physical confrontation. This isn't over, he muttered, pushing past Arlo toward the door. People like her don't belong down here with us. She'll bring nothing but trouble. After he left, Arlo hurried to Juno. Are you all right? Did he hurt you? She shook her head, but her hands were trembling. Arlo noticed a torn piece of paper on the floor. It looked like it had fallen from Juno's pocket. "What's this?" he asked, picking it up. The paper was weathered and torn, but Arlo could make out partial text in an elegant script, along with what appeared to be an official seal at the bottom. The words, "Royal House of Lyria," were still legible, along with fragments of what might have been a formal declaration or letter. "Lyria," Arlo read aloud, watching Juno's reaction. "Is that where you're from? The Kingdom of Lyria?" Her eyes widened in what might have been recognition, but her expression remained confused, as if the name both meant something and nothing to her at the same time. "It's one of the outer system sovereign states," Arlo continued, trying to recall what little he knew of interplanetary politics. "They have an embassy in the diplomatic quarter. I think." This seemed to align with Juno's earlier drawing pointing to the embassy district. Arlo examined the paper more closely, noting the quality of the material, not the synthetic substitutes used in Neo-Santoria, but actual pulp-derived paper, a luxury reserved for the most formal or traditional communications. "We need to get to Mara's," he decided, carefully folding the fragment and returning it to Juno. "If you are connected to Lyria somehow, that might explain why you ended up, well, the way I found you." Juno nodded, seemingly relieved that some progress was being made in establishing her identity. She followed Arlo willingly as they made their way down the corridor to Mara's apartment, the crown still clutched tightly in her hands. Mara's living space was similar in size to Arlo's, but transformed by the sheer volume of electronic equipment crammed into every available surface. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with partially disassembled devices, spools of optical fiber, and diagnostic tools. The air smelled of solder and ozone. "Finally," Mara said as she ushered them in, quickly securing the door behind them. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming." "We had a situation with Tanner," Arlo explained briefly. Mara grimaced. "That waste of oxygen. Don't worry about him. I've got a little security override on my door that keeps unwanted visitors out." She gestured to a cleared space on her main workbench. "Now, let me see this crown of yours." Juno hesitated, clearly reluctant to part with the object. "It's okay," Arlo assured her. "Mara's an expert. She might be able to tell us what it does." After a moment's consideration, Juno carefully placed the crown on the workbench. Under the bright work lights, its true complexity became more apparent. What had looked like tarnished metal in the dimmer light of Arlo's apartment now revealed itself as an intricate weave of nanocircuitry embedded in a metallic alloy. Mara whistled softly. "This is high-end tech. Nothing like the mass-produced junk we get down here." She pulled a magnification visor over her eyes and examined the crown more closely. "The alloy itself is unusual. It has properties similar to memory metals, but more advanced. And these circuits?" She trailed off, completely absorbed in her examination. After several minutes of silence, broken only by the occasional murmur of technical jargon, she straightened up and pushed the visor back onto her forehead. "Well?" Arlo prompted. "It's a neural interface," Mara said, her voice tinged with awe. "An incredibly sophisticated one, based on the design. I'd say it's meant to amplify and externalize memory, not just access it, but actually project it somehow." "Memory." Arlo glanced at Juno, who was watching Mara with intense concentration. "You mean it could help her remember who she is?" "Possibly," Mara hedged. "But it's damaged. See these breaks in the circuitry? And some of the connector nodes are missing entirely." She pointed to several empty settings where gemstone-like objects had once been placed. "Without these components, it's incomplete at best, non-functional at worst." Juno made a sound of frustration, the closest she had come to actual speech since Arlo found her. "Could you repair it?" Arlo asked. Mara ran a hand through her short hair. "Considering. Maybe. Not perfectly." but I might be able to patch the circuitry enough to get some basic functionality. She looked at Juno directly. But I need to know what we're dealing with here. This kind of tech isn't just lying around in garbage heaps. It's royal-tier equipment, the kind reserved for planetary leaders or the ultra-wealthy. Arlo explained about the paper fragment with the Lyrian royal seal and Juno's drawing of the embassy district. Mara's expression grew serious. Lyria. That explains a lot. They're known for their memory preservation technology. It's central to their culture and governance. Their ruling family uses neural interfaces to access the collective memories of past monarchs. She tapped the crown thoughtfully. If this belongs to someone from the Lyrian royal house? She didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications were clear. Juno might be far more than a lost, confused woman. She might be connected to interplanetary royalty. We need more information, Mara decided. And there's only one place in Neo-Centauria where we might find it without attracting too much official attention. Where's that? Arlo asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. Club Solara, Mara replied grimly. In the upper tier. Club Solara was notorious among the common tier residents, a playground for the elite where information, luxury goods, and political favors flowed freely amid holographic entertainment and imported delicacies. It was theoretically open to all citizens with sufficient credits, but in practice, its exclusivity was maintained through exorbitant entry fees and an unspoken dress code that effectively barred anyone from the lower tiers. How are we supposed to get in there? Arlo asked incredulously. I don't exactly blend in with the upper tier crowd. Leave that to me, Mara said with a confident smile. I do maintenance work for some of the club's systems. Nothing high profile, but enough to get us in through the service entrance. She turned to study Juno thoughtfully. The bigger challenge will be making her look the part once we're inside. Juno tilted her head questioningly. We need to dress you like you belong in the upper tier, Arlo explained, so you won't attract attention. Understanding dawned in Juno's eyes, followed by a flicker of what might have been amusement, as if the idea of pretending to be elite was ironic to her in some way. I might have something that would work, Mara said, moving to a storage compartment embedded in the wall. My sister worked as a companion escort before she left for the outer colonies. She left some of her client meeting attire behind. She extracted a shimmering garment that caught the light with an almost liquid quality. The dress was simple in design, but made of a material that suggested wealth and sophistication. It's a bit outdated by upper-tier standards, but it should pass casual inspection, Mara said, holding it up against Juno to gauge the fit. You're smaller than my sister was, but we can adjust it. Juno reached out hesitantly to touch the fabric. Her expression, a mixture of fascination and what Arlo thought might be recognition. She seemed to know quality when she saw it, another hint at her possible background. What about me? Arlo asked. I can't exactly go in my sanitation uniform. Mara assessed him critically. I've got a service tech uniform you can wear. It won't get you into the main club areas, but it will let you move through the maintenance corridors without questions. She grinned suddenly. Unless you want to try squeezing into my sister's other outfits? Arlo rolled his eyes at the joke, but his mind was already racing ahead to the potential dangers of their plan. What exactly are we looking for at Club Solara? Information, Mara replied, becoming serious again. The club has direct feeds to all major news networks, including diplomatic channels. If there's any news about Lyrian royalty gone missing, it would be accessible there. She glanced at Juno. And more importantly, it's a gathering place for diplomatic staff. If she really is connected to the Lyrian embassy, someone there might recognize her. Juno nodded emphatically at this, seemingly eager despite the risks. There's something else, Mara added, returning to the workbench where the crown lay. I might be able to make temporary repairs to this neural interface. Not enough for full functionality, but possibly enough to trigger some memory recovery, when she's in an environment that might be familiar to her. Is that safe? Arlo asked, concerned. Mara's expression was frank. No. Neural interfaces are delicate technology. A malfunctioning one could cause anything from headaches to seizures to permanent cognitive damage. She looked at Juno directly. It's your choice. The risk is significant, but it might be the quickest way to recover your memories. Juno considered this for only a moment before nodding decisively, her determination clear. All right then, Mara said, pulling her tools closer. Let me see what I can do with this crown. Arlo, help her with the dress adjustments. We'll head to Club Solara at peak hours tonight. That's when security will be most distracted by the crowd. As Mara set to work on the delicate circuitry of the crown, Arlo helped Juno modify the dress to fit her smaller frame. Throughout the process, he found himself increasingly curious about her true identity. If she was indeed connected to Lyrian royalty, what had happened to leave her amnesiac and abandoned in a Neo-Santorian alleyway? And more troublingly, who might be looking for her? Night fell over Neo-Santoria, transforming the city into a glittering display of light and shadow. In the upper tier, where Club Solara occupied 3 floors of the prestigious Apex Tower, holographic advertisements danced across the facades of gleaming buildings, and the quiet hum of hover vehicles replaced the clattering noise of the lower levels. Arlo, Juno, and Mara approached the tower through a series of service tunnels that connected the city's infrastructural systems. Mara had changed into her official technician's uniform, complete with corporate badges that would grant her access to the building's maintenance areas. Arlo wore a similar outfit, though his fit poorly and lacked the specific credentials that might be scrutinized under close inspection. Juno, however, was transformed. The shimmering dress, adjusted to fit her slender frame, brought out an innate elegance in her bearing that had been obscured by the borrowed clothes and confusion of recent days. Mara had also managed to style her unusual silver blonde hair into an upswept arrangement that framed her face beautifully. Around her neck hung the repaired crown, now fashioned into a necklace pendant to avoid drawing undue attention. "Remember the plan," Mara whispered as they approached a service entrance monitored by a single security drone. "I'll get us inside through the maintenance corridors. Arlo, you stay with me, posing as my assistant. Juno, once we reach the club level, you'll need to slip away into the main area alone. We can't go with you without proper credentials." Juno nodded, her eyes clear and focused. The repair work on the crown had already yielded small improvements in her condition, while she still couldn't speak coherently. Her movements were more assured, her gaze more present. "You'll have about an hour," Arlo added, studying her with concern. "Just try to see if anything triggers your memory, especially around the diplomatic sections of the club. We'll meet you at the East Service Corridor at midnight exactly." Juno touched the pendant at her throat and gave them a reassuring nod. Mara approached the security drone and presented her credentials. After a moment's scanning, the drone beeped acknowledgement, and the service door slid open. They slipped inside, entering a world completely different from the lower tiers where they lived. Even the maintenance corridors of Apex Tower were cleaner and more efficiently designed than the main thoroughfares of the common tier. The lighting was soft, but adequate. The air filtration systems worked perfectly, and the sound dampening prevented the noise of the club above from penetrating the service areas. They navigated through a maze of corridors, Mara occasionally stopping to pretend to check various systems whenever they encountered other maintenance personnel. Finally, they reached a service elevator that would take them to the club level. "This is where we separate," Mara said as the elevator ascended. "Juno, there's a staff changing area just past the elevator. The door to the main club is beyond that. Wait for a group of servers to go through, then slip in behind them." The elevator doors opened onto a bustling kitchen area. Servers in elegant uniforms moved efficiently between preparation stations and service elevators, carrying trays of exotic foods and beverages. The trio moved quickly through the space, drawing little attention in the controlled chaos. As planned, they reached the changing area, where Mara gave Juno final instructions. Remember, midnight at the East Service Corridor. If anything goes wrong, try to make your way back to this area and find us. Juno squeezed Arlo's hand briefly, her eyes communicating both determination and gratitude. Then slipped away to follow a group of servers heading toward the main club. Now we wait, Mara said, pulling Arlo into an adjacent maintenance room filled with climate control equipment. And hope she finds what she's looking for. Club Solara pulsed with light and energy as Juno stepped through the service doors into the main area. The vast space was arranged in terrace levels, each offering different entertainment and social experiences. Holographic displays shimmered throughout, showing everything from abstract art to news feeds to live performances from other parts of the city, or even other planets. Juno moved carefully through the crowd, her posture and the quality of her dress allowing her to blend in despite her lack of identification or club membership. The elite of Neo Santoria barely glanced at her, too absorbed in their own conversations and displays of wealth to notice another well-dressed woman in their midst. As she navigated the space, Juno found herself drawn to a particular section of the club where the lighting was more subdued and the clientele more serious in demeanor. Small badges and insignia on their clothing suggested diplomatic affiliations. This, she realized, must be the area frequented by embassy personnel. Her hand went instinctively to the crown pendant at her throat. It felt warm against her skin, the repaired circuitry responding to her proximity to potential memory triggers. Mara had explained that the neural interface worked partly through association. Exposure to familiar environments or information could help activate dormant memories. Juno approached a large holographic display showing current interplanetary news. Her eyes scanned the floating text and images, searching for anything related to Lyria. For a few minutes, nothing relevant appeared. But then, the feed shifted to diplomatic updates. A headline shimmered into existence. Lyrian diplomatic relations remain strained following royal disappearance. Beneath it, an image appeared that made Juno freeze in place. It showed a formal portrait of a young woman with silver blonde hair and piercing eyes, dressed in ceremonial regalia that included a more elaborate version of the crown Juno now wore as a pendant. The caption identified the woman as Princess Lyria, heir to the Lyrian throne, missing for 3 weeks. Juno stared at the image, her heart racing. The face looking back at her from the holographic display was her own. The crown pendant grew hot against her skin as neural pathways long dormant began to reactivate. Fragmented memories flashed through her mind. A grand palace with views of a turquoise sea. Solemn ceremonies where the crown was placed on her head, connecting her to the collective wisdom of ancestors. Urgent voices warning of danger. A desperate flight through unfamiliar corridors. She stumbled backward, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of broken memories. A nearby diplomatic attaché noticed her distress and approached with concern. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, then froze as he got a closer look at her face. His eyes widened in recognition. "By the stars, Princess Lyria?" The name triggered another cascade of memories, this time accompanied by a sharp pain that radiated from the crown pendant. Juno gasped, unable to respond as the neural interface struggled to process the suddenly accessible memory fragments. The attaché reached for his communication device, but Juno, acting on instinct rather than clear thought, turned and pushed her way back through the crowd. She needed to find Arlo and Mara. Something was wrong, not just with her memories, but with the situation surrounding her disappearance. As she moved toward the service areas, a commotion erupted behind her. The diplomatic attaché had apparently alerted others to her presence. Security personnel began to move through the club, their expressions alert and focused. Juno quickened her pace. The elegant dress, now a hindrance as she tried to navigate the crowded space. The East Service Corridor was still some distance away, and the midnight meeting time hadn't yet arrived. She would need to hide until then. She ducked into a quieter alcove, trying to process the fragments of memory now swirling through her consciousness. She was Princess Lyria, heir to the throne of the Kingdom of Lyria. There had been some kind of threat. Betrayal from within? An attack? The memories were still too fragmented to form a coherent narrative. What was clear, however, was that her disappearance was known, and that at least some diplomatic personnel recognized her. What remained uncertain was whether they were allies or threats. The pendant continued to pulse with heat as more memories struggled to surface. Juno closed her eyes, trying to focus on the most recent ones before her amnesia. Images flashed. A grand chamber in chaos. Guards fighting unknown assailants. A trusted advisor urging her to flee, pressing something into her hands. The crown, her birthright and the repository of royal memory. "There she is!" The sharp voice cut through her concentration. Juno's eyes snapped open to see two security officers approaching, accompanied by the diplomatic attaché who had recognized her. "Princess Lyria," the attaché said, his voice carrying a mix of relief and urgency. "Thank the stars you're alive. We've been searching everywhere for you." Juno backed away, instinctual caution overriding any desire to trust. Something in her fragmented memories warned against easy acceptance of apparent allies. "Please, Your Highness," the attaché continued, reaching out a hand. "Let us take you to the Lyrian embassy. You'll be safe there." The mention of safety triggered another memory flash. Whispered conversations about infiltration within the embassy itself. Warnings about trusting the diplomatic corps after the attack. The crown pendant flared hot against her skin. Juno turned and ran, pushing past startled club patrons toward the nearest exit sign. She needed to reach Arlo and Mara. Somehow, she knew they were her best chance at safety until she could fully recover her memories and understand what had happened to her. Behind her, the security officers gave chase, their calls for her to stop drawing more attention. The elegant attendees of Club Solara parted before the disruption, their expressions ranging from annoyed to intrigued by the unexpected drama in their exclusive sanctuary. Juno spotted a service door and darted toward it, hoping it might lead to the East Corridor, where she was meant to meet her friends. As she pushed through, alarms began to sound. Apparently, she had triggered some security protocol by entering an unauthorized area. The service corridor was dimly lit and empty of personnel, who had likely responded to the alarms by heading toward the main club area. Juno moved quickly, searching for any sign that would direct her to the East Corridor. The pendant continued to pulse, memories surfacing and receding like waves, disorienting her further. A sound behind her made her turn. The diplomatic attaché had followed her into the service area, now alone without the security officers. "Princess," he said, his voice lower and more urgent. "You must not trust the embassy officials. The attack on the palace was orchestrated by those closest to the throne." This aligned with her fragmented memories, but caution kept Juno wary. How could she know whom to trust? "I represent the lunar conspiracy," the man continued, using a phrase that resonated deep within Juno's fractured memories. "The loyalists who remain faithful to your family. We've been searching for you since the coup." The coup. The word unlocked another series of memories. Her parents, the King and Queen of Lyria, falling during the attack. The betrayal by the Lord Chancellor. The invasion forces of the Vantorian Empire seizing control of the palace while claiming to be peacekeepers. As these memories crystallized, Juno felt her voice returning, the neural pathways reconnecting as the crown's interface synchronized with her recovering consciousness. "The East Corridor," she managed to say, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I must find my friends." The attaché nodded. This way, Your Highness. Quickly.
They moved through the service areas, avoiding the security personnel now searching the club. As they turned a corner, Juno saw Arlo and Mara waiting anxiously at the designated meeting point.
Juno,
Arlo called out, relief evident in his voice. His expression changed to wariness when he saw the man accompanying her.
Who's this?
Before Juno could respond, the sound of multiple footsteps echoed from an adjacent corridor. A group of figures in the distinctive uniform of the Vantorian Diplomatic Security Force rounded the corner, weapons raised.
Princess Lyria of the House of Asteria, the lead officer announced formally. By authority of the Provisional Government of Lyria, you are to be taken into protective custody.
The diplomatic attaché who had accompanied Juno stepped protectively in front of her.
She is under the protection of the Lunar Conspiracy, he declared. The true loyalists of Lyria reject the puppet government installed by Vantoria. The standoff was immediate and tense.
Juno, her memories now flooding back with increasing clarity, understood the danger they all faced. The Vantorian Empire had orchestrated the coup that had overthrown her parents and seized control of Lyria. Their protective custody would almost certainly result in her quiet elimination, removing the last legitimate heir to the throne. But the diplomatic attaché, while claiming loyalty to her family, was still an unknown quantity. The Lunar Conspiracy had been a secret organization even before the coup, and she had no way to verify his true allegiance. In that moment of crisis, Juno's eyes met Arlo's. In his face, she saw genuine concern uncontaminated by political calculation. This man had found her at her most vulnerable, had protected her without knowing her identity, had treated her with dignity when she appeared to be nothing more than a homeless woman in the trash. Her decision was made.
I will go with neither faction, Juno announced, her voice growing stronger with each word. Arlo Nguyen gave me shelter when I had none. He will remain my protector until I determine whom I can trust.
The Vantorian officer scoffed.
A waste collector? This is absurd. Your Highness, the situation requires diplomatic finesse and proper security.
The princess has spoken, the attaché said, though his expression suggested he was equally displeased by her choice. The Lunar Conspiracy acknowledges her right to choose her own path.
This is not a negotiation,
the Vantorian officer replied coldly, raising his weapon.
The princess will be secured for her own protection, regardless of her temporary confusion.
The tension in the corridor escalated as both sides prepared for confrontation. Juno, acting on recovered royal training and instinct, reached for the crown pendant. The neural interface had been growing warmer as her memories returned, the circuitry responding to her mental state.
"Stand down,"
she commanded, using the formal tone that had been drilled into her since childhood.
"I am still the rightful heir to the throne of Lyria, and I will not be a pawn in Vantoria's game of empire."
As she spoke, she removed the pendant and quickly reshaped it back into its crown form. Before anyone could react, she placed it on her head. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The repaired neural interface activated fully, connecting with the building's security systems through frequencies encoded specifically for royal use, an emergency protocol designed to protect Lyrian royalty in foreign territories. The crown glowed with a soft blue light, and the holographic security systems throughout the corridor flickered and changed configuration. Protective barriers of hard light materialized between the opposing groups, temporarily preventing either faction from approaching Juno, Arlo, and Mara.
"What's happening?"
Arlo asked, staring in amazement at the holographic shields.
"Royal override,"
Juno explained, her voice now clear and assured as more of her training and knowledge returned.
"My crown contains emergency protocols that can temporarily control certain security systems.
It won't last long." She turned to Mara.
"Is there another way out?"
Mara nodded, quickly recovering from her surprise.
"Maintenance shaft, level B3. It connects to the waste disposal system."
"How fitting,"
Juno said with a small smile at Arlo. We're going back to where we started. As the Vantorian officers and the lunar conspiracy attaché attempted to disable the holographic barriers, Juno, Arlo, and Mara slipped away through a service panel that Mara quickly unlocked. They descended through a series of narrow maintenance shafts, eventually reaching the vast underground network of waste processing tunnels that ran beneath Neo Santoria. These tunnels connect to the main disposal facility near the old harbor, Arlo explained, as they moved through the dimly lit passages. If we can reach it, there might be transport vehicles we can use to get farther away from the city center. Juno nodded, though she was clearly struggling with the influx of recovered memories. The crown on her head continued to glow faintly, processing and integrating her fragmented past. Are you all right? Arlo asked, noticing her distress. My memories, Juno replied, her voice strained. They're returning too quickly. The neural interface wasn't meant to be damaged and repaired this way. It's overwhelming. Maybe you should take it off for a while, Mara suggested. Juno shook her head firmly. I can't. Not until I've recovered everything I need to know about the coup and who I can trust. She looked at Arlo with intense gratitude. You were right to be cautious about both factions. The Vantorians are clearly my enemies, but even the lunar conspiracy might have their own agenda for me. They continued through the tunnels, the sounds of pursuit occasionally echoing from distant passages. The waste disposal system was a labyrinth, and Arlo's knowledge of its layout gave them an advantage over their pursuers. After what seemed like hours of navigating the underground network, they emerged into the massive central processing facility that handled Neo Santoria's technological waste. The cavernous space was largely automated, with only a few night shift workers overseeing the sorting and recycling machinery. The loading docks are this way, Arlo whispered, leading them along a gantry that overlooked the main processing floor. There should be transport hover carts heading out to the reclamation yards. As they moved carefully across the facility, Juno suddenly gasped and clutched her head. The crown flared brighter for a moment, then dimmed. What is it? Mara asked anxiously. The final memories, Juno said, her voice thick with emotion. The day of the coup. I remember everything now. She straightened, her expression hardening with resolve. My parents were betrayed by our own Lord Chancellor, who had secretly allied with the Vantorian Empire. They were killed while trying to protect me. Arlo placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry. The lunar conspiracy is real, Juno continued. They are loyalists who oppose Vantorian rule, but they want to restore me to the throne immediately through armed rebellion. I'm not sure that's the right path. Before they could discuss further, the sound of a security alarm echoed through the facility. The few workers present looked up in confusion as armored figures began to pour in through multiple entrances. The Crimson Dirigible, Juno whispered in horror, recognizing the distinctive red accents on the armor. Vantoria's elite elimination squad. We need to move now, Mara urged, pulling them toward the loading docks. They ran across the remaining length of the gantry as the facility erupted into chaos. Workers scattered as the Crimson Dirigible forces secured the area, their efficient movements suggesting military training far beyond standard security personnel. At the loading docks, they found a small hover transport being loaded with processed materials, bound for the reclamation yards outside the city. Without hesitation, they slipped aboard, hiding among the containers of sorted technological components. Moments later, the transport hummed to life and began to move, leaving the facility behind as the Crimson Dirigible forces continued their search inside. In the cold storage compartment of the transport, surrounded by containers of recycled materials, Juno removed the crown and exhaled deeply as the neural interface powered down. Her hands trembled slightly as she set it aside. My memories are fully restored now, she said quietly. Both the blessing and the curse of remembering everything. Arlo and Mara waited patiently as she collected herself. the gentle hum of the transport's engines, the only sound in the cramped space. "I am Princess Lyria of the House of Asteria," she finally continued, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "Sole heir to the throne of the Kingdom of Lyria. 3 weeks ago, our palace was attacked during what was supposed to be a diplomatic reception. The Vantorian Empire, long seeking to expand its influence in our sector, had corrupted several key officials in our government." She paused, the pain of recollection evident in her eyes. "My parents, King Terran and Queen Alara, were killed in the throne room. My father's last act was to place the royal memory crown on my head, transferring the emergency protocols and essential memories of our lineage to me. He told me to run, to survive, to remember." Arlo listened intently, beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had stumbled into when he found her in that alley. "I escaped through the ancient passages beneath the palace," Juno continued. "But I was pursued. In desperation, I used a diplomatic transport to flee to Neo-Santoria, where Lyria maintains an embassy. But I was betrayed again. Someone within our diplomatic corps was working with the Vantorians." "That's how you ended up in the lower tier?" Mara asked. Juno nodded. "I was ambushed near the embassy. In the struggle, the crown was damaged and I received a head injury. The combination disrupted the neural interface and my own memories. I managed to escape into the depths of the city, but with no memory of who I was or what had happened. After that," she looked at Arlo, "you found me." "The Vantorian Empire is claiming that they intervened at the request of your government," Mara said, recalling news reports she had seen. "They're positioning themselves as peacekeepers, not conquerors." "A convenient fiction," Juno replied bitterly. "They've installed the Lord Chancellor as head of a provisional government, while supposedly investigating the tragic accident that claimed my parents' lives." Her expression hardened. "And now they hunt me, the last legitimate threat to their narrative." "And the lunar conspiracy?" Arlo asked. "Can they be trusted?" Juno's response was measured. "They are loyal to my family and oppose Vantorian rule. But their methods, they believe that only immediate armed rebellion will restore Lyria's independence. They would use me as a figurehead, a rallying point for violent resistance." "You don't agree with that approach," Arlo observed. "Violence against violence rarely leads to lasting peace," Juno said softly. "My mother taught me that. The crown contains her memories too, her wisdom." She touched the metal circlet gently. "There must be another way to reclaim my throne, without plunging my people into a bloody civil war." The transport lurched slightly as it changed direction, reminding them of their precarious situation. "What now?" Mara asked practically. "The Vantorians won't stop looking for you, and the lunar conspiracy will try to find you too." Juno considered this, her royal training evident in her thoughtful deliberation. "We need time and safety to develop a strategy. Somewhere neither faction would think to look for a princess." A small smile touched her lips as she looked at Arlo. "Perhaps continuing to hide in plain sight is our best option." "The reclamation yards," Arlo suggested. "They're technically outside Neo-Santoria's jurisdiction, in the borderlands. Thousands of people work there sorting and repurposing technological waste. It's chaotic, diverse, easy to disappear in. And I know people there," Mara added. "Technicians who operate off the grid, who could help us establish new identities and secure communications." Juno nodded decisively. "Then that's where we'll go. From waste. We'll build something new, a way to reclaim my kingdom without bloodshed." As the transport carried them toward the uncertain sanctuary of the reclamation yards, Juno reached out and took Arlo's hand. "You found me in the trash and treated me like a queen, even when I couldn't remember I was one," she said softly. "I won't forget that loyalty." Arlo squeezed her hand gently, still processing the extraordinary turn his ordinary life had taken. "I just did what anyone should do," he replied.
No, Juno said with certainty. You did what only the best of us would do. And that's exactly the kind of wisdom and compassion I'll need to reclaim my throne and lead my people. The reclamation yard sprawled across the borderlands beyond Neo Santoria's official boundaries. A vast expanse of organized chaos, where the city's technological waste was sorted, repurposed, and recycled. Mountains of discarded devices created a jagged skyline against the dawn horizon as the transport carrying Juno, Arlo, and Mara approached the main processing center. They disembarked quietly, blending with the early shift workers arriving for the day. Mara led them through the labyrinthine pathways between sorting stations and repair shops, navigating with the confidence of someone familiar with the territory. My contact works in the advanced recovery section, she explained in a low voice. Siren Gray. She used to be a journalist before the media consolidation. Now she documents the flow of technology from the upper tiers to the reclamation yards, tracking corporate waste patterns and planned obsolescence. Can she be trusted? Juno asked, her royal training making her cautious after so many betrayals. As much as anyone can be, Mara replied honestly. She has no love for authority or empires, and she owes me for keeping her communication equipment running when the corporate enforcers tried to shut her down. They found Siren in a makeshift office constructed from shipping containers, surrounded by displays showing data flows and analysis algorithms. She was a tall woman with sharp features and observant eyes that widened in surprise when she saw the trio enter her space. Mara, she greeted cautiously. Unexpected company. Friends who need to disappear for a while, Mara replied, securing the door behind them. Siren studied Juno with particular interest, her journalist's instincts clearly sensing something significant. You look familiar. I have that kind of face, Juno replied smoothly, the diplomatic training of her royal upbringing taking over. Siren wasn't convinced, but didn't press. What kind of disappearing are we talking about? Temporary low profile or permanent identity change? Somewhere in between, Arlo said. We need to establish a secure base of operations, away from Neo Santoria's surveillance networks. And communication capabilities, Juno added. Secure channels that can't be traced or monitored. Serene's eyebrows rose. That's not the usual request from people on the run. She leaned back in her chair, considering. You're not criminals, are you? I don't help arms dealers or human traffickers, no matter what they're paying. We're not criminals, Juno assured her. She hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. We're working against the Vantorian Empire's expansion efforts. This caught Siren's interest immediately. Political dissidents. Then. That's more my style. She activated a privacy shield that hummed softly as it created a bubble of signal-blocking energy around the container. Let's talk details. Over the next few hours, plans were made and resources allocated. Siren provided them with a vacant residential unit in the workers' quarters, a simple but private space where they could establish themselves. More importantly, she granted them access to her communication systems and information networks. Most of the reclamation yard operates outside official oversight, Siren explained, as she showed them their new accommodations. The corporations and city government pretend to regulate it, but they really just want their waste processed cheaply. That creates gaps we can exploit. The living space was small but functional. 2 rooms with basic furnishings salvaged from discarded upper-tier apartments, a rudimentary kitchen unit, and, luxury of luxuries in the borderlands, private sanitation facilities. It's not a palace, Siren said, with no idea how accurate her comparison was. But it's secure. The building's power is off-grid, tapped from the main processing center's excess, and there's no registry of occupants. It's perfect, Juno said sincerely. After her time in Arlo's cramped apartment, even this modest space seemed comfortable. More importantly, it was safe, for now.
After Seren left, promising to return with more supplies and information, the three companions took stock of their situation. "What's our next move?" Arlo asked, looking to Juno. Despite her youth, her royal training and the recovered memories from the crown had given her a strategic mind that he had come to respect. Juno sat on one of the salvaged chairs, the crown resting on a table before her. "We need information. Accurate information about what's happening in Lyria under Vantorian occupation. And we need to identify potential allies, both here and in my kingdom." "The lunar conspiracy seems like a natural ally," Mara pointed out. "Despite their militant approach." "Yes," Juno agreed. "But they need guidance, not just a figurehead. If I simply return and call for rebellion, thousands will die in a war we might not win." She touched the crown gently. "The memories of my ancestors teach that timing and public support are crucial for any regime change." "So we build support," Arlo suggested. "Start small, create a network." Juno nodded, a plan forming in her mind. "Exactly. The reclamation yards are filled with people from all walks of life, including Lyrian refugees who fled after the coup. We find them, build a core of loyal supporters, establish communication with sympathizers still in Lyria." "A grassroots resistance," Mara said with growing enthusiasm. "Operating in the shadows until you're ready to reveal yourself." "The Trash Queen's Rebellion," Arlo said with a small smile, the name coming to him suddenly. Juno laughed, the first genuine laugh he had heard from her. "From the trash to the throne. It has a certain poetry to it." In the days that followed, they began implementing their plan. Seren. Once she understood the true nature of their mission, though not Juno's exact identity, became an invaluable ally, using her journalist contacts and research skills to gather intelligence about Lyrian refugees in the borderlands. Mara's technical expertise proved equally essential. She continued working on the royal memory crown, stabilizing its neural interface and enhancing its communication capabilities, while ensuring it couldn't be detected by Vantorian scanning technology. Arlo, with his knowledge of Neo-Centoria's waste collection systems and the people who operated them, became their eyes and ears, identifying potential recruits and establishing safe routes for messages and meetings. And Juno, drawing on both her royal training and the collective wisdom stored in the crown, began crafting a message of hope and resistance that would resonate with her displaced people, without triggering immediate Vantorian reprisal. 2 weeks after their arrival at the reclamation yards, they held their first clandestine gathering of Lyrian expatriates, in an abandoned processing warehouse, cleaned and prepared for the occasion. 20 carefully selected individuals assembled, drawn by whispered promises of news from home and hope for the future. Juno observed them from behind a makeshift curtain as they entered. Workers, technicians, former merchants, and a few who carried themselves with the bearing of military training despite their civilian clothes. All shared the distinctive silver-tinged hair color common among Lyrians, though many had dyed theirs to blend in. "Are you ready?" Arlo asked softly, standing beside her. Juno took a deep breath. "I've been preparing for this my entire life, though I never imagined it would happen this way." She touched the crown, now redesigned as a simpler circlet that could pass for decorative jewelry. "My ancestors guided generations through war, peace, prosperity, and hardship. Their memories remind me that leadership isn't about palaces or titles. It's about responsibility to one's people." Arlo nodded, once again struck by the wisdom that seemed beyond her years. "They'll follow you, not because of your title, but because of who you are." "Who we are," Juno corrected him, touching his hand briefly. "This journey began with your compassion, Arlo. Never forget that." When all were assembled, Mara activated a privacy field, similar to Seren's but larger, ensuring their gathering couldn't be detected or monitored. Then she nodded to Juno, who stepped out from behind the curtain to face her people. A murmur, ran through the small crowd as they recognized her, not as the homeless woman Arlo had found, but as their princess. Some immediately dropped to one knee in the traditional Lyrian gesture of respect. Others stared in disbelief, hope warring with skepticism on their faces. "Rise," Juno said, her voice clear and commanding despite its gentleness. "We are all equals here, all Lyrians far from home." As they stood, she continued, 3 weeks ago, our kingdom fell to betrayal from within and aggression from without. My parents, your king and queen, were murdered by those who claimed to be allies. I escaped with nothing but the royal memory crown and my life. She touched the circlet on her head. I might have perished, lost and alone, had it not been for the compassion of one who owed me nothing. Arlo Nguyen found me discarded like waste, with no memory of who I was, and treated me with dignity and kindness. She gestured to Arlo, who stood uncomfortably under the sudden attention. He reminds us that true nobility comes from actions, not titles. One of the older men in the group stepped forward. Your Highness, the lunar conspiracy has been waiting for your return. We are ready to take up arms and... Juno raised a hand to pause him. I am aware of the conspiracy's readiness for war, and I honor your loyalty. But I will not send my people to die in a battle we cannot yet win. The Vantorian occupation is too strong, their propaganda too effective. Many Lyrians still believe their lies about my parents' deaths. What would you have us do, then? Asked a woman with the hardened expression of someone who had lost much. Wait in exile while our home is stripped of its resources and our culture is suppressed? No, Juno replied firmly. I would have us build a different kind of resistance, one that begins not with weapons, but with truth and connection. She outlined her vision, a network of communication between the diaspora and those still in Lyria, sharing accurate information about the occupation, documenting Vantorian abuses, and quietly identifying officials who might be sympathetic to restoration. This is the lunar conspiracy reborn, she explained. Not as an army, but as a movement of truth and memory. We will use the very technologies and systems the Vantorians think they control to undermine them from within. She detailed their immediate plans, establishing secure communication channels, creating a system for documenting Vantorian activities, identifying and supporting resistance within Lyria itself. And when the time is right, she concluded, when we have built sufficient support and weakened their control, then we will reclaim our kingdom, not just for the royal house, but for all Lyrians. The meeting lasted for hours, as plans were refined and responsibilities assigned. When it finally concluded, each participant left with a specific role and a renewed sense of purpose. They would become the first cells of what would grow into a comprehensive resistance network, operating in the shadows of the reclamation yards and beyond. As the last of them departed, Juno sat heavily on a makeshift chair, the weight of leadership evident in her posture. You were magnificent, Mara told her, beginning to pack up the privacy field generator. Indeed, came a new voice from the shadows of the warehouse. Most impressive for one so young. They all turned sharply as a figure stepped into the light. The diplomatic attaché from Club Solara, who had claimed allegiance to the lunar conspiracy. How did you find us? Arlo demanded, moving protectively toward Juno. The man raised his hands in a placating gesture. I've been searching since you disappeared from the club. The reclamation yards were a logical refuge, given your unusual companions. He bowed formally to Juno. Princess, I am Destin Val, Intelligence Coordinator for the Lunar Conspiracy. I've come to offer our formal resources to your cause. Juno studied him carefully, accessing the Crown's memories for any information about this man. My father knew you, she said finally. You served as his special envoy to the outer colonies. Destin nodded. For 7 years. I was off-world when the coup occurred. which is why I survived when many other loyalists did not. And now, Juno asked, now I coordinate what remains of our intelligence network. We have operatives still in place within the Vantorian occupation government, gathering information and waiting for the right moment to act. He regarded her with respect. Your approach is wise, Princess. The direct military action some have advocated would be disastrous. The Vantorians are too entrenched. Their military too powerful for a frontal assault. Arlo remained skeptical. Why should we trust you? You could be reporting to the Vantorians right now. A reasonable concern, Destin acknowledged. Which is why I've come alone, with information as my only credential. He produced a small data crystal and placed it on the table. This contains the current security protocols for the Vantorian occupation forces, including patrol schedules and communication frequencies. It also identifies several officials within the provisional government who secretly oppose Vantorian rule. Mara picked up the crystal, examining it with professional interest. This looks authentic, but we should verify before acting on anything it contains. Of course, Destin agreed. Caution is essential in these times. Juno studied the man who claimed to be her ally, weighing the risk of trusting him against the potential value of his resources. If your information proves accurate, we would welcome your assistance, she said finally. But understand this. I will lead this resistance my way. The lunar conspiracy will adapt to my vision, not the reverse. As it should be, Destin said with another formal bow. You are the rightful sovereign. We serve at your pleasure. The addition of Destin's intelligence resources accelerated their efforts considerably. Over the following weeks, the resistance network expanded throughout the reclamation yards and into Neo-Santoria itself. Lyrian expatriates, once isolated and fearful, found purpose and community in the growing movement. Some provided safe houses. Others managed communication relays, while those with technical skills developed systems to bypass Vantorian surveillance. Saren Gray, initially skeptical about the royal connection, became one of their most valuable allies. Her investigative skills and media connections allowed them to document Vantorian abuses and disseminate the truth about the occupation to counteract the Empire's propaganda. Mara continued refining the royal memory crown, now integrating it with a secure communication system that allowed Juno to address supporters across Neo-Santoria without revealing her location. The neural interface, originally designed to access ancestral memories, now served as both a symbol of Lyrian sovereignty and a practical tool for resistance. Throughout it all, Arlo remained at Juno's side, his practical knowledge of Neo-Santoria's infrastructure proving invaluable for moving people and materials undetected. But more than that, his unwavering moral compass helped guide Juno when difficult decisions arose. We've received word from our contacts in the Lyrian capital, Destin reported during one of their strategy sessions. General Voss of the Vantorian Occupation Force has ordered the destruction of the Royal Archives. The archives contain thousands of years of our history and cultural heritage, Juno said, distressed. They're trying to erase our identity to make occupation easier. We have an opportunity to prevent this, Destin continued. Our operatives could sabotage the incinerators before the documents are destroyed. But that would expose them, Arlo pointed out. They'd be caught immediately. Some sacrifices are necessary in resistance, Destin argued. Juno paced the small room, weighing the options. The crown on her head glowed softly as she accessed the wisdom of her ancestors. Finally, she turned to Mara. The archives are digitized as well, correct? Backup systems maintained by the royal archivists? Yes, Mara confirmed. But those systems are within the palace complex, under heavy guard. Not the physical systems, Juno clarified. The data itself. If we could access the archivist's emergency protocols. Understanding dawned on Mara's face. A remote data extraction instead of a physical rescue. It's possible, especially with the Crown's royal access codes. Exactly, Juno said. We save the knowledge without sacrificing lives. She turned to Destin. Tell your operatives to focus on establishing a secure connection to the Archive's emergency backup systems. We'll handle the extraction from here. The plan succeeded. 3 days later, as Vantorian forces ceremoniously burned the physical archives, the data had already been secretly transferred to secure storage within the reclamation yards. It was their first significant victory against the occupation, achieved without bloodshed. You've preserved our people's memory, Destin said admiringly after the operation. This will be a powerful symbol when it becomes known. More than a symbol, Juno replied. Knowledge is power. These archives contain information about Lyrian legal precedents, geographical resources, and governmental structures that will be essential when we reclaim our kingdom. As the resistance grew, so did the risks. Vantorian intelligence began to detect patterns suggesting organized opposition. Increased security patrols appeared in the borderlands, and informants infiltrated the reclamation yards, searching for signs of the rumored trash queen who was rallying Lyrian expatriates. They're getting closer, Seren warned, after returning from a reconnaissance mission to Neo-Centauria. The Crimson Dirigible has established a permanent presence in the city, and they're specifically tasked with finding you, Princess. We need to accelerate our timetable, Destin urged, before they locate our network. Juno considered their situation, consulting both her advisors and the ancestral memories contained in the crown. We're not ready for direct confrontation, she concluded, but perhaps we're ready to present an alternative vision to our people. That night, using the crown's enhanced capabilities and Mara's technical genius, Juno broadcast a message to every Lyrian communication device, bypassing Vantorian sensors. Her image, regal despite her modest surroundings, appeared to her scattered people. Citizens of Lyria, she began. I am Princess Lyria of the House of Asteria, rightful heir to the throne. I speak to you from exile, but I am very much alive. Despite what the occupation forces claim, she outlined the truth of the coup, naming those responsible for betraying the kingdom and describing the Vantorian Empire's true intentions. Then, she shared her vision for resistance and eventual restoration, not through devastating war, but through unity, perseverance, and strategic action. We will not defeat the Vantorian war machine with violence alone, she declared. We will outlast them with our resolve, undermine them with truth, and reclaim our sovereignty through the unified will of our people. The path ahead is long, but Lyria has endured for thousands of years. We will endure this as well. The broadcast lasted only minutes before Vantorian forces managed to block it, but the impact was immediate and profound. Throughout Lyria and the expatriate communities, people who had lost hope found it renewed. The resistance, which had been operating in total secrecy, now had a public face and a clear message. It also had a target. The Vantorian response was swift and brutal. Curfews were imposed throughout Lyria, dissent was punished severely, and the hunt for the treasonous princess intensified. In Neo-Centauria, the Crimson Dirigible expanded their search, conducting raids on suspected Lyrian gathering places and offering substantial rewards for information. The commander of the Crimson Dirigible has arrived personally to oversee the search. Destin reported grimly after one of their secure communications with operatives in the city. General Andros Vantoria himself. Juno's expression darkened at the name. The same general who led the palace attack that killed my parents. He's ruthless and efficient, Destin warned. And he has unlimited resources at his disposal. Then we must be smarter and more adaptable, Juno replied. We can't match their strength, but we can exploit their weaknesses. Over the following days, they refined their security protocols and communication methods. The resistance cells were restructured to operate more independently, reducing the risk of widespread compromise if one group was discovered. Safe houses were established throughout the reclamation yards and beyond, creating a network of potential hiding places. Despite these precautions, the noose continued to tighten. Informants infiltrated the outer circles of their network, and surveillance drones began regular sweeps of the borderlands. It became increasingly clear that the reclamation yards would not remain a safe haven much longer. "We need to relocate our central operations," Arlo suggested during an emergency council meeting. "Somewhere unexpected, where the Vantorians wouldn't think to look for royalty." "Where did you have in mind?" Juno asked, trusting his practical knowledge of Neo Santoria's hidden corners. "The Undercity," Arlo replied. "The abandoned industrial sector beneath the old financial district. It was sealed off decades ago when they built the new levels above it. But the waste collection system still connects to it for maintenance access." "It's perfect," Mara agreed, after consideration. Self-contained power systems that were never decommissioned, extensive manufacturing facilities that could be repurposed, and completely off the official grid. "It's also rumored to be structurally unsound," Seren pointed out. "That's why it was abandoned in the first place." "Parts of it are," Arlo acknowledged. "But I've been through there on maintenance rounds. The central sections are still solid. With some work, they could be made habitable." Juno made her decision. "The Undercity it is. Mara, work with Arlo to assess what we'll need for conversion. Seren, establish a cover story for increased activity near the access points. Destin, prepare evacuation protocols for our most essential personnel." The relocation was underway when disaster struck. A resistance cell in Neo Santoria was compromised, its members captured by the Crimson Dirigible. Under intensive interrogation, one of them revealed knowledge of the reclamation yard headquarters. The warning came barely an hour before the attack. A hurried message from one of Destin's operatives within the Vantorian security apparatus. As sirens blared across the borderlands and armored transports approached from the city, the resistance scrambled to evacuate. "Get to the emergency transport," Destin urged, helping to load essential equipment and archives. "I'll coordinate the diversionary tactics to cover your escape." "What about our people still in the yards?" Juno demanded. "They have their orders," Destin assured her. "Disperse. Go to ground. Reconnect through the emergency channels once the immediate danger has passed." Arlo guided Juno toward the waiting transport, while Mara finished securing their communication equipment. "We need to move now," he insisted. "The Crimson Dirigible will have air support any minute." As they rushed through the chaotic evacuation, a massive explosion rocked the eastern perimeter of the yards. Flames and smoke billowed into the night sky as one of the main processing plants detonated, a planned diversion to draw Vantorian attention away from the escape routes. They had almost reached the transport when a second explosion, much closer, threw them to the ground. Arlo covered Juno protectively as debris rained around them. When he looked up, a figure in the distinctive armor of the Crimson Dirigible stood before them, weapon raised. "Princess Lyria," the soldier announced through his helmet's external speaker. "By order of General Andros Vantoria, you are to be taken into custody." Before Arlo could react, a blur of motion struck the soldier from behind. Mara, wielding a heavy wrench, had caught him by surprise. The soldier stumbled, but didn't fall, turning to face this new threat with trained efficiency. "Go!" Mara shouted, engaging the soldier in close combat. "I'll hold him off!" Arlo pulled Juno to her feet, and they ran toward an alternative escape route, a maintenance access to the waste disposal system that would lead them to the Undercity. Behind them, the sounds of struggle faded as they descended into the underground network. The tunnels were dark and disorienting, lit only by Arlo's portable work lamp. They moved as quickly as they dared through the winding passages, hearing distant sounds of pursuit echoing confusingly from multiple directions. "This way," Arlo whispered, guiding Juno through a narrow side tunnel. "There's a service elevator at the junction ahead that connects directly to the Undercity level." They reached the junction only to find the elevator non-functional. It's power cut. Emergency stairs, Arlo decided, pointing to a narrow maintenance ladder that disappeared into the darkness below. They had descended perhaps halfway, when a harsh light suddenly illuminated them from above. Looking up, Juno saw several crimson dirigible soldiers at the tunnel entrance, their weapons trained on the exposed ladder. "Surrender now!" commanded a voice that carried the unmistakable authority of high rank. "There is nowhere left to run." Juno looked down at Arlo, several rungs below her on the ladder, then back up at the soldiers. The crown on her head pulsed warmly, connecting her to the memories and wisdom of generations of Lyrian rulers. In that moment, she made her decision. "Keep going," she told Arlo softly. "Find the others. Continue what we've started." Before he could protest, she removed the crown and pressed it into his hand. "The memories are what matter, not the person who carries them. This crown belongs to Lyria, to its future. Make sure it gets there." Then she turned and began climbing back up toward the soldiers. "I am Princess Lyria of the House of Asteria," she called out. "I will surrender myself to prevent further bloodshed, on condition that my companions go free." "Juno, no!" Arlo called from below, but she continued climbing. At the top, she faced the assembled soldiers with regal dignity, despite her humble attire. Behind them stood a tall figure in more elaborate armor, his helmet removed to reveal a face hardened by years of military command. "General Andros Vantoria." "I presume," Juno said coolly. "The man who murdered my parents." "The man who eliminated traitors to the greater peace," he corrected, studying her with clinical interest. "You've led us on quite a chase, Princess." "The chase isn't over," Juno replied, subtly positioning herself to keep the soldiers' attention focused on her rather than the ladder behind her. "My surrender is merely one moment in a much longer struggle." Andros gestured, and two soldiers moved to restrain her. "A struggle that ends today," he stated. "With your capture, the last legitimate threat to Vantorian authority in Lyria is neutralized." "Legitimacy doesn't come from force," Juno said as they bound her wrists. "It comes from the consent of the governed, something you will never have." The general regarded her with cold amusement. "Philosophy is a poor substitute for practical power. Princess, a lesson your parents failed to learn." He turned to his subordinates. "Secure the area. Find her associates." As they led her away, Juno maintained her composure, focusing on one certainty. Arlo had escaped with the crown, the repository of Lyria's heritage, and the key to its future. Whatever happened to her now, the resistance would continue. In the darkness below, Arlo clutched the crown and fought back despair. Juno's sacrifice had given him time to descend deeper into the maintenance shaft, eventually reaching the abandoned levels of the Undercity. But the victory felt hollow with her in enemy hands. He moved through the cavernous spaces of the once thriving industrial sector, now silent and dust-covered after decades of abandonment. Massive machinery stood like sleeping giants in the dim emergency lighting that still functioned in some areas. Following the plans they had developed for the relocation, Arlo made his way to the designated rendezvous point, an old administrative center that had once overseen the manufacturing operations. To his relief, he found several resistance members already there, including Seren, and, to his surprise, Mara, sporting a bruised face but very much alive. "You made it," Seren said with evident relief. "Where's the princess?" The crown in his hands was answer enough. "She surrendered herself to give me time to escape with this," he explained, his voice hollow with guilt and grief. "She made the right strategic choice," Destin said, emerging from an adjacent room where he had been setting up communication equipment. "The crown and what it contains are more valuable to our cause than any individual. Even the princess herself." Arlo rounded on him angrily. "She's not just a symbol or a strategic asset. She's a person who sacrificed herself for all of us. A sacrifice we will honor by continuing her work, Destin replied evenly. The Vantorians will use her capture for propaganda, to demonstrate their control and discourage resistance. We must counter quickly, show that the movement continues even without her physical presence. We're going to rescue her, Arlo stated, not a question but a declaration. Eventually, yes, Destin agreed. But not immediately. Security will be at its highest now. We need to regroup, rebuild our network, and gather intelligence on where they're holding her. Arlo knew the logic was sound, but it did little to ease the ache in his chest. He looked down at the crown in his hands, the repository of Lyrian memory and heritage, entrusted to him by a woman who had gone from nameless refugee to inspiring leader in the span of mere weeks. What do we do now? He asked, looking around at the gathered resistance members. We build, Mara said simply. We turn this abandoned place into the headquarters Juno envisioned. We create something from nothing, just like she did with our movement. Over the following days, that's exactly what they did. The Undercity slowly transformed under their efforts. Dormant power systems were reactivated, living quarters established, communication networks extended. Refugees and resistance members filtered in through carefully secured routes, bringing skills, supplies, and determination. Arlo threw himself into the work, focusing on practical problems to avoid dwelling on Juno's capture. He coordinated the rehabilitation of essential infrastructure, drawing on his knowledge of Neo Santoria's systems to tap into water and power without detection. A week after the evacuation, Seren returned from a reconnaissance mission with critical news. They're holding her in the diplomatic tower, under heavy guard. The Vantorians are planning a public trial to legitimize their occupation. When? Arlo demanded. 3 days from now. They're making a spectacle of it, broadcasting throughout Lyria and neighboring systems to demonstrate their authority. Then they've given us our opportunity, Destin said, his eyes lighting with strategic calculation. A broadcast of that magnitude requires extensive preparation and equipment that can be repurposed. Mara understood immediately. We hijack their transmission, use their own broadcast to counter their narrative. Exactly, Destin confirmed. But we'll need access to their systems, which means getting someone inside the diplomatic tower. All eyes turned to Arlo, who had been studying the crown with growing intensity. Since Juno's capture, he had spent hours each day with the neural interface, using it as she had taught him, not to wear it, as only those of Lyrian royal blood could fully interface with its systems, but to access the basic technical functions that controlled its external capabilities. I'll go, he said without hesitation. I know the tower's waste management systems. There's maintenance access that bypasses most of the security checkpoints. It's too dangerous, Mara objected. You're too valuable to the resistance now. Arlo shook his head firmly. Juno trusted me with this crown because she knew I would do whatever necessary to continue her work. Right now, that means getting close enough to use it to disrupt their plans. After much debate, a plan was formulated. Arlo would infiltrate the diplomatic tower, disguised as a maintenance worker, carrying the crown modified to appear as standard technical equipment. Meanwhile, Mara would coordinate a remote technical team, ready to exploit any access he could create to their broadcast systems. The objective wasn't to rescue Juno. That would be nearly impossible given the security, but to use the crown's royal override protocols to access the broadcast and allow her to address her people one more time, countering the Vantorian narrative before it could take hold. On the day of the trial, Arlo entered the tower through a waste processing intake, navigating service corridors with the confident stride of someone who belonged there. His uniform, procured by Seren from actual maintenance contractors, gave him enough authenticity to avoid casual scrutiny. The crown, now disguised as a diagnostic tool, hung at his belt. Mara had modified it further, enhancing its transmission capabilities while maintaining its essential functions. If he could get close enough to the broadcast control center, the Crown could establish a connection that would give their technical team remote access. Security increased dramatically as he approached the upper levels where the trial would be held. Ventorian guards checked credentials at every junction, and automated scanners swept continuously for unauthorized technology or weapons. Using service passages and maintenance shafts, Arlo managed to bypass most of these checkpoints. When confronted, he presented work orders prepared by Seren, flawless forgeries authorizing emergency maintenance on the environmental systems for the broadcast chamber. Finally, he reached a service panel adjacent to the main broadcast control room. Through a ventilation grill, he could see technicians making final adjustments to the elaborate setup. Beyond them, in the main chamber, a raised platform had been prepared where Juno would stand during the trial. Arlo activated the Crown, initializing the connection sequence Mara had programmed. Almost immediately, the device began to pulse with warmth, not the standard operation Mara had predicted, but something different, more intense. In that moment, Arlo realized what was happening. The Crown was detecting Juno's presence nearby. The neural interface, designed to connect with Lyrian royal consciousness, was responding to its primary user. Through the service panel, Arlo made his way closer to the broadcast chamber, following the Crown's increasingly strong pulses. In a small antechamber, guarded by 2 crimson dirigible soldiers, he finally found her. Juno sat composed and dignified despite her prisoner's attire. Her hands were bound before her, but her posture remained regal, her expression serene rather than defeated. When Arlo accidentally dislodged a ceiling panel while repositioning himself for a better view, her eyes flicked upward, somehow finding his hiding place with unerring accuracy. Their gazes met across the distance, and Arlo saw recognition flash in her eyes, followed by the slightest shake of her head, a warning not to attempt a rescue. She had already accepted what was to come and didn't want him to risk the mission for her personal safety. The door to the antechamber opened, and General Andros entered, flanked by additional guards. "It's time, Princess," he announced. "Your public awaits." As they led her toward the main chamber, Arlo retreated to his original position near the broadcast controls. The Crown was now pulsing steadily, its connection to both Juno and the technical systems growing stronger. When the transmission began, Arlo activated the final sequence. The Crown flared brilliantly, its circuitry establishing connections to both the broadcast system and, unexpectedly, to Juno herself. The neural interface, even at a distance, recognized its true owner. In the broadcast chamber, as General Andros began reading the formal charges against the treasonous royal house of Lyria, Juno suddenly straightened, her eyes glowing with the same blue light as the crown in Arlo's hands. "People of Lyria," she said, her voice cutting through Andros's recitation, "hear the truth from your rightful sovereign." The general's voice faltered as he realized something was wrong. The broadcast, designed to show Lyrian submission to Ventorian authority, was being commandeered before his eyes. The Ventorian Empire came not as allies, but as conquerors. Juno continued, her voice strengthened by the crown's connection. "They murdered your king and queen, my beloved parents, and sought to erase our heritage and identity." Technicians scrambled frantically at their controls, trying to cut the transmission, but the Crown's royal override protocols had locked them out of their own systems. "I stand before you now as their prisoner, but Lyria stands undefeated," Juno declared. "Our resistance continues in the shadows, preserving our culture and preparing for the day when we reclaim our sovereignty." General Andros, recovering from his initial shock, ordered the guards to restrain her, but Juno continued speaking, even as they approached. "Remember who you are," she told her people. "Remember our history, our values, our strength. The night seems darkest now, but dawn always follows. Lyria will rise again." As guards seized her arms, Juno looked directly at the hidden service panel where she somehow knew Arlo watched. "From the trash, we build our throne," she said, invoking the resistance motto that had begun with her rescue from that alleyway. "From the discarded, we forge our future." The transmission abruptly cut off as Vantorian forces physically restrained her and damaged the broadcast equipment. In the chaos that followed, Arlo retreated through the service passages, the crown clutched tightly in his hands, its glow gradually subsiding. He escaped the tower through the same maintenance routes he had used to enter, eventually making his way back to the Undercity headquarters, where the Resistance anxiously awaited news. "It worked," he reported as he rejoined them. Juno was able to address the people directly. The Vantorians couldn't stop the transmission until she delivered most of her message. "The impact is already evident," Seren confirmed, monitoring communication channels. "Spontaneous demonstrations have broken out in 3 Lyrian cities. The Vantorians are scrambling to respond." "And the princess?" Destin asked. Arlo's expression grew grave. "Still their prisoner. There was no opportunity for rescue." He placed the crown carefully on their planning table. "But she's unbroken. She continues to lead even in captivity." "What happens now?" Mara asked the question they were all thinking. Arlo looked around at the transformed Undercity space, once abandoned and forgotten, now bustling with purpose and activity. In the short time since they had arrived, the Resistance had established a functional headquarters, complete with living quarters, communication centers, and planning areas. What had been trash and ruins was becoming something new and vital. "We continue building," he said firmly. "Just as Juno would want. We strengthen our network, expand our influence, prepare for the moment when we can act decisively." He touched the crown gently. "And we keep her message alive in every way possible." In the weeks that followed, the Resistance grew exponentially. Juno's broadcast had galvanized Lyrian expatriates throughout Neo-Santoria and beyond, bringing new recruits and resources to their cause. The Undercity headquarters expanded, transforming more of the abandoned industrial sector into a hidden society dedicated to Lyria's eventual liberation. Arlo, once a simple sanitation worker, found himself increasingly in a leadership role, though he deferred to Destin on matters of strategy and intelligence. His practical wisdom and unwavering moral compass made him the heart of the Resistance, much as Juno had been. Reports from Destin's operatives within the Vantorian occupation forces indicated that Juno had been moved from the diplomatic tower to a more secure facility following her broadcast intervention. Her public trial had been postponed indefinitely, the Vantorians unwilling to risk another such incident. 2 months after her capture, during a routine planning session, an emergency alert sounded through their communication system. Seren rushed in, her expression a mixture of shock and hope. "There's been an explosion at the Vantorian security headquarters," she reported breathlessly. "Initial reports suggest a prisoner transfer was attacked. Multiple casualties on both sides." "Juno?" Arlo asked immediately, his heart racing. "Unknown," Seren replied. "But the timing and location align with intelligence suggesting she was being held there." Destin was already mobilizing response teams. "We need eyes on every medical facility and security checkpoint immediately. If she's free, we need to find her before the Vantorians do." For the next 24 hours, the Resistance operated at maximum alert. Operatives throughout Neo-Santoria monitored Vantorian communications and movements, searching for any sign of Juno. The crown remained on the central planning table, pulsing occasionally as if sensing the heightened activity. Then, in the early hours of the morning, a signal appeared on their security perimeter. Someone had entered the outer approaches to the Undercity headquarters through one of the waste disposal access points. "Single individual," Mara reported, monitoring the sensor grid she had established. "Moving slowly, possibly injured." Arlo led a security team to investigate, his heart pounding with hope and fear in equal measure. They moved cautiously through the dimly lit access tunnel, weapons ready. A figure appeared in the distance, limping but determined, supporting themselves against the tunnel wall. As they drew closer, Arlo recognized the distinctive silver blonde hair, now matted with dust and what might have been blood. "Juno," he breathed, lowering his weapon and rushing forward. She looked up at the sound of his voice, her face bruised but her eyes bright with triumph. "Arlo," she managed before her strength finally gave out. He caught her as she collapsed, lifting her gently in arms, strengthened by years of hauling waste. "We've got you," he assured her. "You're safe now." Back at headquarters, as medical personnel tended to Juno's injuries, mostly superficial, though she was severely exhausted, she recounted what had happened. The lunar conspiracy, operating independently but aligned with their resistance, had orchestrated the attack during her transfer to a more remote facility. "It was chaos," she explained, her voice hoarse but growing stronger. "The transport was hit with some kind of electromagnetic pulse that disabled the Vantorian weapons. Combat broke out between my escorts and the attackers. In the confusion, I managed to slip away." "How did you find us?" Mara asked, adjusting the medical monitor attached to Juno's arm. "The crown," Juno replied simply. "I could sense it, like a beacon calling me home. The neural interface created a connection that persisted even after we were separated." She looked at Arlo with immense gratitude. "You kept it safe, just as I knew you would." "We kept everything safe," he told her, gesturing to their surroundings. "The resistance has grown stronger in your absence. Your message during the broadcast inspired thousands to join our cause." Juno took in the transformed Undercity headquarters with wonder. What had been preliminary plans when she was captured was now a reality. A hidden society with all the infrastructure needed to support and expand the resistance. "From trash to throne," she murmured, smiling at the realization of how literally they had implemented the motto. "You've built something remarkable here." "We just followed the foundation you laid," Arlo replied. Every decision was guided by the question, what would Juno do? In the days that followed, as Juno recovered her strength, she was brought fully up to date on the Resistance's progress. The network now extended throughout Neo-Santoria and had established connections with sympathetic factions within Lyria itself. Intelligence gathered by Destin's operatives suggested growing discontent with Vantorian rule, particularly after Juno's broadcast had exposed the truth about the coup. "The time is approaching when we can move from resistance to restoration," Destin advised during a strategy council. "The Vantorian hold on Lyria is weakening. Civil unrest increases daily, and their military resources are being stretched by conflicts elsewhere in their empire. But we're still not strong enough for a direct confrontation," Mara pointed out. "Their technology and weaponry outmatch anything we could deploy." "Perhaps we don't need to match them in conventional strength," Juno suggested, the crown once again adorning her head, its glow steady and bright. "Perhaps we use the very systems they rely on against them." She outlined a bold plan. Rather than attacking Vantorian forces directly, they would target the automated systems that maintained their control: communications, surveillance, resource allocation. The Crown's royal override protocols, originally designed to access Lyrian governmental systems, could be modified to infiltrate and disrupt the occupation infrastructure. "It's not about defeating their army," she explained. "It's about making it impossible for them to govern effectively. When the systems they depend on begin to fail, when resources can't be distributed and orders can't be transmitted, their authority will crumble from within." The plan would require months of preparation, gathering intelligence on Vantorian systems, developing specialized override protocols, positioning operatives throughout the occupied territories. But it offered what conventional resistance could not: a path to liberation that minimized bloodshed while maximizing effectiveness. As the resistance mobilized to implement this new strategy, Juno took a moment to speak privately with Arlo in a quiet corner of the headquarters. "I never properly thanked you," she said softly. "Not just for finding me in that alley, but for everything since. For believing in me when I couldn't remember who I was. For protecting the crown when I couldn't. For continuing the resistance when it would have been easier to flee." Arlo shook his head modestly. "I only did what seemed right at each step. You're the one who transformed a simple act of kindness into a movement that might liberate an entire kingdom." "That's not how I see it," Juno replied, taking his hands in hers. "You showed me that true nobility isn't about bloodlines or crowns or thrones. It's about seeing value in what others discard, about treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their circumstance." She smiled, her eyes bright with emotion. "You found me in the trash and treated me like a queen before either of us knew I was one. That lesson will guide my rule when we reclaim Lyria." The following day, Juno addressed the gathered resistance members in what had once been a manufacturing floor and was now their central assembly area. Hundreds of Lyrians and allies from various backgrounds stood together, united by a common cause. Upon a simple platform constructed from reclaimed materials, a temporary throne built literally from the discarded refuse of Neo-Santoria, Juno stood with the crown glowing brilliantly upon her head. Arlo stood beside her, no longer a sanitation worker, but a trusted advisor, and the embodiment of the principles their resistance now represented. "We begin today, not just the liberation of Lyria, but its transformation," Juno declared. "What was broken will be rebuilt stronger. What was discarded will be reclaimed and repurposed. The path ahead remains challenging, but we face it together, knowing that from the darkest circumstances can come the brightest future." The crown's glow intensified, as if in affirmation, its light reflecting in the hopeful eyes of those gathered before her. In that moment, looking out at the resistance she had inspired, people who had once been scattered and afraid, now united and determined, Juno knew with certainty that they would succeed. The journey from trash to throne had only just begun, but its ultimate destination was now clear to all: a liberated Lyria built on the foundations of compassion, resilience, and the unshakable belief that true value lies not in appearance or circumstance, but in the dignity inherent in every person, a lesson taught by a sanitation worker who had found a lost princess in the garbage and treated her like a queen.